Well, you will remember that we are looking for ways to identify the root causes of terrorism, motivated by the belief that there are certain nonviolent, peacemaking, justice-seeking policies and practices that folks and nations can pursue as an alternative to or alongside of military responses to terrorism. In our first two presentations, we looked at first the clash of civilizations, which is the idea that terrorism arises primarily out of some fundamental tensions between the Western Christian world or culture and the Muslim world. Then we looked at a paradigm called jihad versus McWorld, which suggests that international tension arises because of resistance around the globe, resistance which Benjamin Barber calls jihad, to a cheap consumerist American culture that he calls McWorld. Okay, let's turn now to a third paradigm for making sense of the root causes of terrorism. I've called this resistance to American empire. And here I'm drawing primarily upon the work of Andrew Bacevich. Bacevich is quite interesting. His academic credentials are as impressive as Huntington's and Barber's. But what is most interesting about Bacevich is that he is a career military person in the United States, and as you can see, has taught at West Point, as well as Boston University and Johns Hopkins. There's also a deep tragic irony about Bacevich's work. Bacevich was an opponent of the invasion of Iraq after 9/11, but his own son, who followed in Andrew's footsteps in a military career, was killed in that war. Bacevich's fundamental claim is this: the United States' capacity and its willingness to exert its political and military power globally in support of its economic and political interests, fancy word for that is imperialism, produces hostility and opposition. Other folk have used the word blowback. From Bacevich's perspective, or applying Bacevich's analysis to the war on terror, Islamic terrorism is an aspect of this generalized hostility against the United States and the West for their capacity and willingness simply to exert their power in their own interests around the globe. Again, let me make 5 key points. Writing early in the early years of the war on terror and during the Bush administration, Bacevich noted the Bush administration's willingness to affirm America's global hegemony or its global dominance, and to affirm preventive war as an aspect of U.S. security policy, protecting and maintaining that global dominance and hegemony. You should be aware that periodically every U.S. president publishes a document on national security strategy. Many people found the Bush administration document of 2002 particularly noteworthy. Noteworthy because of its honest and straightforward recognition that the United States enjoyed a position of unparalleled military strength and political and economic influence, and its honest commitment to maintaining that situation in terms of what it called a balance of power, although it's already acknowledged there is no such balance, a balance of power in favor of human freedom, an international mission, it affirmed, in support of human dignity and democracy and development, free markets and free trade to every corner of the world. So an interesting sort of mixture of the language of power with what are thought to be American ideals related to freedom. The other thing that was profoundly interesting about the document was its affirmation of what it called preemptive use of military force in the context of terrorism, not simply in response to challenges to American dominance, but to prevent the emergence of any nation with an economic, political, or military capacity to challenge American dominance. Though Bacevich identified that aspect of Bush administration policy, he was clear in suggesting that the militarization, or what he called the militarization of U.S. foreign policy, began under a Democratic president, began after the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? And you should be aware, and I drew this from Newsweek magazine, the claim that the United States spends more on military spending than all the other nations of the world combined, even though all of those nations, with the possible exception of Russia, that are ranked below us, are our allies. In fact, there is no enemy nation that spends anywhere near what we spend, or even most of our allies spend, on military spending. Bacevich points out that we often use the language, or our leaders use the language of global leadership. But his analysis suggests that idea of global leadership, which seems to suggest some sort of a responsibility on our part to be the world's policeman, to maintain the international order, is really more a catchphrase, whereby we delude the world, but maybe most significantly ourselves and our own citizens, into justifying our own global dominance. He acknowledges that this strategy of openness, free trade, freedom of speech, is perceived as spreading norms and values that are favorable to us and to our own security. But we also believe it to be, or our leaders tend to believe it to be, supportive of global prosperity. So you see here Bacevich recognizing this mixture of moral ideals with a concern about maintaining American dominance. With respect to those ideals, and we think of the whole broad range of freedoms and human rights for which the United States relieves itself to stand, Bacevich said, look, those ideals do matter. They do motivate us. They are valid in many respects. But they drive American policy only when they coincide with American interests. And where our interests call for a softening of our support for human rights, where our interests require us to form alliances with nations and forces in the global system that aren't supportive of human rights, we are willing to do so. Bacevich would seem to be suggesting that power matters more than ideals or freedom and human rights. Consider this quotation from an historian named Paul Kennedy, who has written on the history of empires, cross time from the Egyptian, the Greek, the Roman, Ottoman, all the way to the American Empire. This quotation from Paul Kennedy, which I think very much reflects a perspective like Bacevich. And Kennedy is asking us to imagine what if the current situation of global dominance was reversed. He writes, suppose that there existed today a powerful, united Arab-Muslim state that stretched from Algeria to Turkey and Arabia, as there was 400 years ago, the Ottoman Empire. Suppose this unified Arab-Muslim state had the biggest economy in the world and the most effective military, of course, as the United States does today. Suppose, by contrast, this United States of ours had split into 12 or 15 countries with different regimes, some conservative and corrupt. Suppose that the great Arab Muslim power had its aircraft carriers cruising off our shores, its aircraft flying over our lands, its satellites watching us every day. Suppose that its multinational corporations had reached into North America to extract oil and paid the corrupt conservative governments big royalties for that. Suppose that it dominated all the international institutions like the UN Security Council and the IMF. Suppose that there was a special state set up in North America 50 years ago of a different religion and language to ours, and the giant Arab Muslim power always gave it support. Here he's asking us to imagine a parallel to Israel in the middle of the Muslim world. Suppose that there was suppose the Colossus state was bombarding us with cultural messages about the status of women, about sexuality that we found offensive. Suppose it was also always urging us to change, to modernize, to go global, to follow its example. In those conditions, would not many Americans steadily grow to loathe that Colossus, wish it harm, and perhaps try to harm it? I think so, he says. Now, when we think about the role of religion, I would ask this question. If these were the realities, might not many among us who are Christians find within our scriptures and in our faith justification for a violent resistance to that Arab Muslim empire? It's a point worth pondering, isn't it? It's also important to remind ourselves in thinking about a Christian appropriation of Bacevich's ideas that the American empire, which he identifies, has roots in what might be called the American civil religion, or what I referred to way back in our presentation on Christian worldview in America, this idea that the United States has unique theological significance, an idea that has been important throughout American history. You remember Roger Betzworth described it this way, quote, "From the beginning, Americans have believed that they have a special destiny, a worldwide mission. The mission of America, an historically created system of meaning, has been an unusually powerful pattern in terms of which we Americans have understood our role in the world community, and by which we have shaped and ordered our relationship to other nations." Now, you'll remember, this idea of the United States having unique theological significance has used a variety of language. We've talked about the United States as God's new Israel, a new chosen people. The secular version of that we hear more about today is this idea of American exceptionalism, that somehow we are unlike any other nation in the world because our values are somehow universal ones, divinely inspired ones. We are a Christian nation. All of that, I think it's important to recognize, has been a theological, religious, spiritual, if you will, undergirding and justification for what Bacevich calls the American empire, that is now producing such profound resistance. It may also be important to remember here that when we spoke about this idea that the United States has unique theological significance, we talked about Betzworth's distinction between two versions of that belief. There is the exemplary version, which he says generates in Americans a profound sense of responsibility simply to embody those divinely given universal values in the most attractive way possible so that others will want to follow our example. More dangerous, and I believe more influential in American history, has been an evangelical version, which insists that we have a responsibility not simply to exemplify these values, but to spread them around the world. That version of the idea of America's unique theological significance is what has possibly underwritten or justified American imperialism. Bacevich's analysis, it seems to me, forces U.S. Christians to make a judgment. Is American empire a good thing, or is it a bad thing? If we affirm America's unique theological significance, if we affirm the United States as a chosen nation, if we affirm American exceptionalism, particularly in some kind of an evangelical version of those beliefs, then U.S. global dominance might be seen, or would be seen, as a good thing. Though the means may appear problematic, that is to say, maintaining military supremacy and projecting military and economic and political power, often unilaterally, though those means may be questionable, they are justified by the end, the global triumph of divinely authorized values related to freedom. From that perspective, like a Clash of Civilizations perspective, a tendency to see the war on terror as a kind of holy war or crusade is generated among Christians. From this perspective, the only hope for peace is a complete U.S. military victory over those forces of evil that challenge the values that define us, those values that we believe have come from God, those values that ultimately must triumph if there is to be peace. I understand that my own view is a quite different one, and there are many other Christians in the United States who share with me, as I pointed out back in the lecture on worldview, that this idea of American chosenness or American exceptionalism or the United States having unique theological significance has no valid biblical or theological basis. If that's right, then a Christian from taking that perspective is likely to regard the American empire, America's global dominance around the world, as a bad thing. And then that means that from such a perspective, we should support greater U.S. honesty about the degree to which its policies have been motivated by self-interest rather than values, and rather than certainly divinely inspired values. From this perspective, the U.S. needs to strengthen multilateral international institutions, to work in a multilateral fashion, to work in cooperation with other nations rather than unilaterally. And maybe most significantly, from this perspective, Christians would claim that the U.S. needs to significantly diminish its global military posture. We have too much of a presence, too many troops, too much violent military power projected around the globe for the world's good or possibly for our own good. All of that, including the reduction of America's military posture, would be seen as contributing to the possibility of peace in this context of global terror. Response to all of the paradigms. First, I think there's probably some truth in all of them. That is to say, to some degree, contemporary global tensions out of which terrorism arises, to some degree, that is generated by cultural, civilizational conflict. To some degree, there is tension between a Muslim worldview and values and Christian ones. To some degree, one must recognize resistance to cheap consumerist Americanized lifestyles being spread around the world. To some degree, that helps also to explain the violence directed against the West. And to some degree, of course, simple offense at the projection and arrogance of American power around the world explains conflict and the terrorism that we are concerned about. I think all three of them, in one way or another, recognize the cultural impact of American domination. None of the three ignore the historic reality of the West, and particularly the U.S., coming to global dominance, and the shrinking of the influence globally of Islamic nations and Islamic power, though the religion itself spreads across the globe. All of the three recognize that. I think Barber's paradigm, Jihad versus McWorld, lifts that up. I would also say that the three paradigms ignore, and even the three taken together, ignore some factors that might have to be considered in any full analysis of the root causes of terrorism. The Roman Catholic bishops, in Living with Faith and Hope, put a lot of emphasis on poverty, that global poverty is a part of what explains resistance to the West. As our economic institutions and our policies have spread their influence, global poverty has not diminished to the degree we would like, and that, they believe, produces a great deal of resistance. I think it should also be pointed out, and we've hinted at this, but many of the governments with which we are allied, and many of the governments throughout the world, and particularly in the Muslim world, suppress dissent. Some would argue that people resort to terrorism precisely because there are no mechanisms for dissent within their own political systems. And finally, there's been some recent work suggesting that terrorism flourishes where governments are corrupt. And here we're talking about something other than simply suppressing dissent. We're talking about governments who use political power simply to reward and to enrich the friends of that government, making it impossible for other folk to utilize the instruments of law and public policy for the promotion of their own interests and their own welfare and that of their families. Clearly, the question of the root causes of terrorism is a complex one. But again, I remind you, any attempt to respond to terrorism in a way that produces a greater justice and greater peace must address those root causes.